and the distinction between durable and storable commodities, how those relate through Le Chatelier's principle to the supply curve of firms over different runs, and the relationship between different run cost curves, as well as how firms respond to demand shocks over time. And how all of the things we're going to say are going to be exactly the opposite when things are storable rather than durable, which will be the main focus of that discussion. Okay, so for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be assuming that firms are price takers. What that means is that the firm is only producing over a range where the change in the quantity that it's able to achieve has a very small impact on the price in the industry. That is, it's not large enough to substantially affect prices. Another way of thinking about this is that basically the demand curve of the firm is flat over the range of the small quantity it's producing, and only when it gets very, very large does the demand curve start to drop. And we'll give foundations for this idea in lecture 16, but for now we're just going to assume that the firm takes the price as given. So that is that its profits are price times quantity minus the total cost as a function of quantity. And Kenneth, can you tell me what the first order condition for a profit maximizing firm that takes prices as given is? You can just take the derivative of this with respect to price, do it with respect to quantity, taking the price as fixed. With respect to quantity, right? And what's the derivative of cost with respect to quantity? Marginal cost, right? Right, the derivative of total cost with respect to quantity is just the marginal cost, right? So the firm is going to equate price to marginal cost. That's the first order condition for a profit maximizing price taking firm, right? So price equals marginal cost, and then we can invert that relationship to figure out how much the firm will produce for a given price, right? So if we invert this relationship, we get that the quantity is equal to the supply as a function of price, where the supply is the inverse of the marginal cost. Right? So let's return to the Cobb-Douglas example. So in the Cobb-Douglas example, the marginal cost curve is k times the output to the alpha, right? And this is increasing, so we can just invert it to find that as long as alpha is greater than 0, to find that the supply is just the inverse of that. Supply is equal to the price, which is over here, divided by k, and then you do it to the 1 over alpha, so you get supply is equal to p over k to the 1 over alpha. Right? Now, this is the sort of most fundamental supply equation. The marginal cost curve is exactly the supply curve, but there's two problems that can arise with this. So one is that firms aren't going to produce unless they're making a positive profit. That is, it's only the area of the marginal cost curve which is above the average cost curve, which is really the supply curve. So an example of that is, lots of airlines have shut down because they got too small. Their traffic wasn't big enough, so they actually had to shut down because it couldn't cover the fixed cost of production. Another example is that the marginal cost curve may go up and down, and so it may intersect the price at multiple places. And this can lead it not to be monotone, and therefore for the supply curve not to be well defined. The firm is only going to choose the most profitable point out of all the points where the price intersects the marginal cost curve, and it will only in particular choose points where the marginal cost curve intersects price from below, not from above. Because when the marginal cost intersects price from above, that's actually a minimum. Does someone want to open the windows? I guess people are getting hot. Does someone open the windows? So it's going to choose, of all the intersections between price and marginal cost, the one that has the most area of profits below the price and above the marginal cost. This can occur especially often when there's quasi-fixed factors which can cause the marginal cost to go up and then down. So a final thing that can happen is if the marginal cost curve is just declining over the full range, then the firm is never going to want to do anything other than produce nothing or produce an infinite amount. And so that will never be a competitive firm because eventually it's going to be producing so much that, that it won't have a small impact on price. Okay, so let me show you some pictures of this. The main point here, though, is that there's no such thing as the supply curve of a firm sloping downward. That is, the firm can never have a Giffen good in the way that consumers do. The firm will always produce weekly more when its price rises. Okay, so let's look at some examples of this. So here's a case where there's a fixed cost and then there's an increasing marginal cost. And the point is the firm would never produce below here because it wouldn't give them enough profit in order to defray their fixed costs. And so their supply curve is not the whole marginal cost curve, it's just this part of the marginal cost curve. So it produces 0 below this point. Another example is here where there's no fixed costs, but there is this like wavy marginal cost curve, right? So in this case, the firm would produce here because the marginal cost is above it, but then if the price rose above that, it would jump over to here, right? Because if the price is a little bit above this, it doesn't want to produce any of these quantities, it's going to produce the quantity over here. Then the price is going to start rising again. Okay, so it'll get to here. Well, now there's going to be multiple intersections. So if the price gets to here, there's multiple intersections. Where is the firm going to want to produce? Well, if it produces here, that's a local minimum. If it produces here, it loses all this amount relative to producing here, and it only gains this amount. So it's not going to want to produce there. It'll produce over here. But then, if the price rises again to here, well, now it would lose this area, but gain this whole big area by producing over here. So it'll switch to the right point. And then as it starts to rise, well, again, there's only one intersection, and then it gets to another one of these areas. And again, it has this choice, which area is bigger or not, and it keeps going, right? So that's what happens if the marginal cost curve doesn't increase. And so basically, the firm will act as if its supply curve is not this wavy thing, but is sort of flat here and flat here at the points where it switches between producing to the left and producing to the right. Okay, so producer surplus is the firm's profit. That's price times quantity minus the total cost. And that's also the same as price minus average cost times quantity. Which is also the same as the area between the price and the marginal cost curve. which can also be seen as a measure of how rapidly increasing the marginal cost curve is. So for a given quantity and price that the firm does at equilibrium, if the marginal cost curve is very quickly increasing, then there will be more profits that the firm earns. Another way of putting that is it's the area between the y-axis and the supply curve. So let me show you that all graphically. So here's a marginal cost curve, and here's the price. We can measure the surplus as either the area between this marginal cost curve and the price, or as the area between the y-axis and the supply curve, or we can measure it as going along the quantities, how quickly increasing is the marginal cost curve, right? That's just doing this vertical distance times the rate at which it increases as it goes up. So if we had a marginal cost curve that had the same price and quantity but was much flatter, like that, you see that would have a lot less surplus. If we have one that's much steeper, that's going to have a lot more surplus. So it's how steep the marginal cost curve is that tells you how much surplus the firm earns. Okay. So those are the basics of supply. Now I want to start talking about how the supply per unit of time depends on the length of time over which we're thinking of. So the response that a firm has to a change in price is going to depend on the length of time they expect that change in price to last for, right? So, and whether they, this is a short period, whether they'll respond more or less in the short versus the long term, if they expect the change in price to last for a short period or a long period, depends on whether the inputs to their production are what we call durables or storables. So the first type is, which we'll focus on during most of the lecture, are intertemporal complements or durables. And Yifei, could you give me Justin. Could you tell me something about durables and what makes something a durable?
I think it would last throughout the entire time period that they're producing over.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe an example might be a machine that you
Yeah.
buy and you expect the quality that will last throughout that time.
Yeah, that's right. So a durable lasts for a fixed but not trivial period of time and gets worse as time goes on, right? And it depreciates with time, not with how many times you use it. What that means is that it doesn't make sense to change how many machines you have very rapidly, right? If you have a machine today, you don't want to not have a machine tomorrow, because that's a waste, right? Another way of thinking about this is that it's cheap to use the durable during the time when it's still there, and it's wasteful not to use it. So if you think about an airplane, right, you would say it's a waste to have an airplane and not use it, or to have a summer house